Welcome to the Book Voices channel. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest book discussions. Now let's dive into today's book.
Okay, so have you ever had like one of those conversations that just goes totally off the
Oh,
rails,
yeah, totally.
where the volume goes way up and someone ends up like storming out? Or maybe everyone just kind of shuts down and nobody says anything, and then you just replay it over and over in your head, like cringing at what you said or wishing you'd said something else?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, I think we've all been there. It's like a universal experience.
And it can have some pretty huge consequences, right?
Absolutely.
Did you know that a crazy number of hospital deaths, something like 98,000 every year, are actually linked to human error in communication? Like people being afraid to speak up when it really matters.
That is a crazy number.
Hmm.
Makes you realize just how important it is to be able to communicate well when the pressure's on.
Right. And that's actually exactly what we're diving into today. We're going to be talking about those really high stakes conversations, the ones where opinions clash and emotions run high. The book Crucial Conversations calls them, well, crucial conversations.
Makes sense?
Exactly. So we want to give you some really solid tools and strategies to help you navigate these crucial conversations more skillfully, instead of just reacting in the moment and either like exploding or completely shutting down.
Yeah, because our instinct is usually just to fight or flee.
Right. Like total caveman brain.
It's like our brains are hardwired for survival, not necessarily for nuanced communication,
Mm.
especially when we feel threatened or stressed.
The book actually talks about how this is partly due to like generations of evolutionary wiring.
It's like our ancestors didn't really have time to sit down and have a calm, rational discussion when a saber-toothed tiger was charging at them.
Yeah, I guess in those situations, running away was probably the better option.
Probably a good call, yeah. But in the modern world, those automatic fight or flight responses can really backfire, especially in those important conversations. We end up making things worse instead of better.
Like, think about a time when you tried to talk things out with your partner, but they just retreated further. Or maybe you tried to give a roommate some feedback, but they completely ignored it.
Yeah, and then they just kept doing the same annoying thing.
It's like we end up creating the very outcomes we were trying to avoid.
Right. And it's not just about avoiding those negative outcomes. It's also about unlocking the incredible power of good communication.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Lloyd J. Ogilvy once said, relationships are the main game in life.
I like that.
And crucial conversations are crucial for healthy relationships. They're also really important in the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. Kerry A. Williard found that a lack of crucial conversation skills is one of the top reasons why executives derail.
And Robert E. Quinn talks about how honest, open communication is what drives learning and growth in organizations.
And maybe even more surprising, some research has linked good communication skills to better physical health. Like studies have shown a connection to stronger immune systems and even better outcomes for people with melanoma.
So crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like, who would have thought that how we talk to each other could have such a huge impact on our physical health?
Right. It's like this hidden superpower that we all have but don't always know how to use effectively.
Okay, so let's get practical. Where do we even start when we find ourselves in one of these crucial conversations?
Well, the book emphasizes this really important first principle called start with heart.
Okay, starting with heart. I like that. So what does that actually mean?
The idea is to get really clear about what you truly want before you even start talking.
Okay, so before you even open your mouth.
Exactly. Before the emotions start to take over. It's about asking yourself three key questions. What do I really want for myself in this situation? What do I really want for the other person or people involved? And what do I really want for the relationship?
So, like, really taking a moment to reflect on your true desires before you jump into the conversation.
Yeah, like setting your internal compass before you start navigating.
So how does that actually help us when things start to get heated?
Well, when you keep those deeper desires in mind, it acts like a guiding light, like a North Star, as the book puts it. It helps you stay focused on what's truly important and steer clear of those reactive behaviors that can really derail the conversation.
So instead of getting caught up in wanting to win the argument or getting revenge, we can stay focused on those deeper goals.
Exactly. And you'll be less likely to say things you'll regret later. The book also talks about this thing called the sucker's choice. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, the sucker's choice. Isn't that where you feel like you're trapped between two bad options?
Right. It's that feeling of being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like you either have to be honest and hurt the other person's feelings, Or you have to lie to protect them, but then you feel like you're being dishonest.
It's like that either thinking that makes us feel like we only have two terrible options.
And the book encourages us to refuse the sucker's choice. Like, don't settle for those limited options. Try to find a third way, the and.
So instead of honesty or kindness, it's honesty and kindness.
Exactly. Maybe there's a way to be honest with your friend about their new haircut, but also do it in a way that's kind and supportive.
So we need to actively look for those and solutions.
Right. And that often requires getting creative and thinking outside of those initial limited options.
Okay, so we started with heart, we're clear about our goals, and we're refusing the sucker's choice. What's the next step?
The next principle is learn to look.
Learn to look. What do you mean by that?
It's all about becoming aware of what's really happening in the conversation. Not just the words being said, but also like the tone of voice, the body language, the subtle shifts in energy.
Okay, so paying attention to the whole picture, not just the surface level stuff.
Exactly. And a big part of learning to look is recognizing when a conversation is becoming crucial, when the stakes are getting higher and emotions are starting to intensify, and even more importantly, noticing when safety in the conversation is starting to erode.
When safety is at risk. Can you explain what that means in a conversation?
Sure. Safety in a conversation means feeling comfortable enough to share your honest thoughts and feelings without fear of being attacked or ridiculed.
So like feeling respected and accepted even if you have a different opinion.
Exactly. And when people don't feel safe, they tend to move towards what the book calls silence or violence.
Silence or violence? Those sound kind of intense.
Yeah, well, silence is basically when people start withholding information. Like maybe they're masking their true feelings by being sarcastic, sugarcoating things, or just avoiding the real issue altogether.
So like not being fully honest or open because they're afraid of the consequences.
Right, or maybe they start avoiding certain topics, changing the subject, or even just physically leaving the room.
And then there's withdrawal.
Yes, exactly. When people completely shut down and stop participating in the conversation, it's their way of protecting themselves when they don't feel safe being vulnerable.
Okay, I can definitely see how all of those behaviors can be signs that someone doesn't feel safe. What about violence?
Violence, in the context of crucial conversations, refers to any attempt to force your meaning on the other person.
So like trying to control the conversation or bully someone into agreeing with you?
Right. It could involve interrupting constantly, dominating the conversation, or even resorting to personal attacks or threats. It's any behavior that makes the other person feel unsafe to share their perspective.
So the first part of learn to look is recognizing when these behaviors are happening, both in ourselves and in others.
Absolutely. It's about increasing your awareness of those subtle cues that safety is being compromised.
Okay, and once we notice that safety is at risk, what do we do?
That's where the next principle comes in. Make it safe.
Make it safe. So how do we actually do that? Like, how do we create that feeling of safety in a conversation where it's starting to feel tense?
Well, the book emphasizes that safety in crucial conversations rests on two fundamental pillars: mutual purpose and mutual respect.
Mutual purpose and mutual respect. Okay, let's break those down. What does mutual purpose mean?
Mutual purpose means that everyone involved in the conversation believes they're working towards a common goal.
So like we're all on the same team, even if we have different ideas about how to get there?
Exactly. It's that shared belief that we all care about each other's interests, not just our own.
And mutual respect.
Mutual respect means that you genuinely value the other person and their perspective, even if you strongly disagree with their views. You're basically saying, I respect you as a human being, even if I don't agree with you.
That seems really crucial, especially when you're dealing with sensitive topics.
It is. Without that foundation of respect, it's almost impossible to have a productive conversation. So the book provides several practical skills for rebuilding safety when it's been compromised. One of those is apologizing.
Apologizing. So like if you realize you've said something that hurt the other person's feelings or made them feel disrespected, just own up to it and say you're sorry.
Exactly. A sincere apology can go a long way in repairing a damaged sense of safety.
Like it has to be a genuine apology, right?
Absolutely. A fake apology or one that's full of excuses is just going to make things worse.
Okay, so genuine apologies are key. What are some other techniques for making it safe?
Another really useful skill is called contrasting.
Contrasting. What's that?
Contrasting is basically a way of clarifying your intentions when there's been a misunderstanding. It's like saying, hey, I don't want you to think this. What I actually mean is this.
So you're addressing the other person's fears directly and reassuring them about your true intentions.
Exactly. The book provides a helpful template for doing this. I don't want misunderstanding. I do want your real intention.
Okay, I like that. Simple and clear. Can you give me an example of how contrasting might work in a real conversation?
Sure. Imagine you need to give some tough feedback to a team member about their performance. They might immediately jump to the conclusion that you think they're incompetent or that you're trying to get them fired.
Yeah, that would definitely create a sense of fear and defensiveness.
Right, so you could use contrasting to say something like, look, I don't want you to think I'm questioning your overall abilities or that I'm unhappy with your work in general. What I do want to discuss is this one specific area where I think there's room for improvement.
So you're clearly separating the specific issue from their overall worth as an employee.
Exactly. And that can really help to maintain safety in the conversation.
Okay, what about when it seems like you and the other person have totally different goals? Like you're both pulling in opposite directions.
That's when a skill called C-RIB can be super helpful.
C-RIB. Okay, what does that stand for?
C-RIB stands for Commit to Seek Mutual Purpose, Recognize the Purpose Behind the Strategy, Invent a Mutual Purpose, and Brainstorm New Strategies.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Let's break it down. What does commit to seek mutual purpose mean?
It means making a clear and upfront commitment to finding a solution that works for everyone involved.
So like basically saying, hey, I'm not going to give up on this conversation until we find a way to make this work for both of us.
Exactly. It sets the tone for collaboration, not competition.
And then recognize the purpose behind the strategy.
This step involves trying to understand the other person's underlying needs and motivations, not just their stated position.
So like asking why questions to get to the heart of what they really want.
Exactly. Because often, what people are demanding is just one way to achieve what they truly desire. By understanding the deeper purpose, you might discover that you actually share some common ground.
Okay, that makes sense. What about invent a mutual purpose?
If you still can't find any common ground, then this step involves trying to create a higher or longer-term goal that you can both get behind.
So like finding a bigger picture that unites you, even if you disagree on the specifics.
Exactly. Like, imagine you and your partner are arguing about how to spend your vacation time. You want to go on an adventure trip, but they want to relax on the beach. You might be able to invent a mutual purpose around spending quality time together and creating lasting memories as a couple.
And then you can brainstorm different ways to achieve that, whether it's a slightly more adventurous beach trip or a more relaxing adventure.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final step, INSRIB. Brainstorm new strategies.
So once you've established that mutual purpose, you can start exploring different options that meet everyone's needs.
Right. You're no longer adversaries fighting over a fixed pie. You're collaborators working together to bake a bigger pie.
Okay, C-RIB sounds like a really useful tool for navigating those situations where it feels like you're on completely different pages.
It can be incredibly powerful for getting back on track and finding a win-win solution.
Okay, so we've covered how to start with heart, how to learn to look, and how to make it safe. What's next?
Now it's time to focus on ourselves and master my stories.
Master my stories. What do you mean by that?
It's all about understanding how the stories we tell ourselves about a situation can influence our emotions and our actions.
So like the way we interpret what's happening can actually create our emotional reality?
Exactly. It's not just the event itself, but it's the meaning we give to the event that really matters.
The book uses a model called the path to action to explain this.
Right. It shows how our thoughts, feelings, and actions are all connected. So first, we see or hear something happen. Then we tell ourselves a story about what that means. That story then triggers an emotion. And finally, that emotion drives our behavior.
So it's like a chain reaction. Event, story, emotion, action.
Exactly. And the key insight is that we are the authors of those stories, even if we don't always realize it.
So even though it often feels like someone else is making us feel a certain way, it's actually the story we're telling ourselves about their actions that's creating that feeling.
Precisely. And that's good news because it means we have the power to change how we feel by changing the stories we tell ourselves.
Okay, I like that. It puts us back in the driver's seat. But how do we actually start recognizing those stories, especially in the heat of the moment?
The first step is to pay attention to your emotions.
So like noticing when you're feeling angry, frustrated, scared, or hurt.
Exactly. And when you notice those strong emotions, take a moment to ask yourself, what story am I telling myself that's creating this feeling?
So like instead of just reacting impulsively, we pause and try to identify the thought behind the emotion.
Right. And it's also important to try to separate the facts from your interpretation of the facts.
Okay, so what actually happened versus what you think it means.
Exactly. because we often treat our interpretations as if they're objective truths, which can lead us down a very unhelpful path. The book also highlights 3 common types of clever stories that we tend to tell ourselves that can keep us stuck in those negative emotional cycles.
Okay, what are those?
They're called victim stories, villain stories, and helpless stories.
Okay, let's start with victim stories. What are those?
Victim stories are those stories we tell ourselves that paint us as innocent sufferers, completely blameless in the situation. It's like we're saying, this is all happening to me, I'm a victim of circumstance.
And villain stories?
Villain stories are the opposite. They demonize the other person, making them out to be the bad guy, the evil villain.
So we're exaggerating their faults and attributing the worst possible motives to their actions.
Right. It's like we're trying to justify our own anger or righteousness by making them out to be the ultimate villain.
And finally, helpless stories. What are those all about?
Helpless stories are those stories where we tell ourselves that there's nothing we can do to change the situation.
So, like, we're giving up before we even try.
Yeah. It's a way of absolving ourselves of responsibility, because if we're truly helpless, then there's no point in even trying to change anything.
Okay, I can definitely see how those stories can be incredibly disempowering and keep us stuck in those negative patterns. So how do we move beyond them?
The key is to start telling the rest of the story.
Tell the rest of the story. What does that mean?
It means actively questioning our initial interpretations and trying to see the situation from a more balanced perspective.
So challenging those automatic assumptions and those clever stories that we tend to fall back on?
Right. The book suggests asking yourself some really helpful questions. Am I pretending not to notice my own role in the problem? Why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do this? And what do I really want in this situation?
I love that question. Why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do this? It forces us to consider alternative explanations for someone's behavior instead of just jumping to the worst possible conclusion.
It's a powerful way to cultivate empathy and compassion, even when you're feeling frustrated or hurt.
Okay, so Master My Stories is all about taking responsibility for our own emotional reactions by carefully examining those stories we're telling ourselves. Now, how do we actually share our own perspective, especially when it's something sensitive or controversial?
That brings us to State My Path. This is about sharing your viewpoint in a way that maximizes the chances of it being heard and understood while still maintaining safety in the conversation.
So, like, finding that sweet spot between being too blunt and too passive.
Exactly. Because just blurting out your opinion without any regard for the other person's feelings can really backfire. But so can saying nothing at all.
So what's the best way to share our perspective, especially when it's something risky or delicate?
The book introduces a really useful framework called the STATE skills. STATE stands for share your facts, tell your story, ask for others' paths, talk tentatively, and encourage testing.
Okay, let's unpack that. Share your facts. That seems like a pretty straightforward starting point.
It is. Begin by presenting the objective information that has led you to your conclusions. This helps to ground the conversation in shared reality.
So, like, if you're concerned about a colleague's performance, you might start by sharing some specific examples of their behavior that you observed.
Exactly. Stick to the observable facts, the things you can both agree on. Then you can move on to tell your story.
So this is where you share your interpretation of those facts, your personal perspective on the situation.
Right. But it's crucial to talk tentatively when you're doing this.
Talk tentatively. What does that mean?
It means using language that suggests it's your perspective, not the absolute truth. Phrases like, it seems to me that, or in my experience.
So you're basically acknowledging that your interpretation is just one possible way of seeing things.
Exactly. And that invites the other person to share their perspective without feeling like you're trying to shut them down.
And then ask for others' paths. This highlights the importance of making it a two-way conversation.
Absolutely. Once you've shared your perspective, genuinely invite the other person to share theirs. Ask questions like, what's your take on this? Or, how are you seeing things?
So showing genuine curiosity about their viewpoint, even if it's different from yours.
Exactly. And finally, encourage testing.
Encourage testing. What does that mean?
It means being open to having your own views challenged and being willing to consider alternative perspectives.
So like actively inviting the other person to poke holes in your argument.
In a way, yes. It's about being open to learning and being willing to change your mind if presented with new information.
That requires a lot of humility.
It does. But it's also incredibly powerful because it creates an environment where everyone feels safe to share their honest thoughts and feelings, even if they're different from yours.
Okay, so state provides a really clear framework for sharing our own perspective effectively and respectfully. Now, what about when it's the other person who's reluctant to share, or maybe they're expressing themselves through those unhelpful patterns of silence or violence?
That's when we need to shift gears and explore others' paths. This principle is all about helping the other person feel safe enough to open up and share their perspective.
And how do we do that, especially when we might be feeling frustrated or impatient ourselves?
The book offers a really helpful set of skills called AMPP. AMPP stands for Ask, Mirror, Paraphrase, and Prime.
Okay, let's go through those one by one. Ask. That seems pretty straightforward.
It is. Start by simply expressing genuine interest in understanding their viewpoint. Ask open-ended questions that invite them to elaborate.
Questions like, what are your thoughts on this? Or how are you feeling about this situation?
Exactly. Just simple, open questions that show you genuinely care about their perspective.
And mirror.
Mirroring involves acknowledging the emotions you're seeing in the other person.
So, like, if they seem angry, you might say, you seem really frustrated right now.
Exactly. You're just reflecting back what you're observing without judgment or interpretation.
And that helps them to feel seen and heard, which can create a sense of safety.
Right. It's like saying, I see you. I get it.
Okay, what about paraphrase?
Paraphrasing is basically restating what you've heard in your own words to make sure you understand correctly.
So it's like saying, so what you're saying is, and then summarizing what you think they said.
Exactly. And this gives them the opportunity to clarify if you've misunderstood anything.
And finally, prime. What does that mean?
Priming is a technique to use when the other person is still hesitant to share even after you've asked, mirrored, and paraphrased. It involves offering your best guess about what they might be thinking or feeling.
So you're basically trying to gently nudge them in the right direction by suggesting a possible perspective.
Exactly. But it's important to present it as a guess, not an accusation. You might say something like, I'm wondering if maybe you're concerned about how this might impact.
And that might just be enough to encourage them to open up.
Right. It's like offering them a starting point, a way to begin articulating what they're thinking and feeling.
Okay, AMPP sounds like a really useful toolkit for encouraging someone to share their perspective even when they're reluctant. So we've talked about how to manage ourselves, how to make it safe, how to share our own views, and how to listen to others. What's the final piece of the puzzle?
The final principle is move to action. This is all about making sure that all that good dialogue actually leads to concrete results.
So it's not just about talking, it's about actually making decisions and taking action.
Exactly. The book emphasizes the importance of being very clear about how decisions will be made and who's responsible for doing what afterwards.
So no more vague agreements or promises that never materialize.
Right, because without clear action steps, all that good conversation can easily go to waste.
So how do we make sure that our crucial conversations actually lead to real change?
The book outlines 3 main ways to make decisions: command, consult, and consensus.
Okay, tell me about command.
Command is when one person makes the decision, usually without much input from others.
So like a manager making a decision that impacts their team.
Exactly. And this can be appropriate in certain situations, like when a decision needs to be made quickly or when the decision maker has all the necessary information and expertise.
Okay, what about consult?
Consult involves gathering input from others before making a decision.
So like getting different perspectives and feedback before making the final call.
Right. This can be a good way to build buy-in and make sure you're not missing anything important.
And finally, consensus.
Consensus is when everyone involved jointly agrees on a decision.
So everyone has a voice and everyone feels ownership of the final outcome.
Exactly. This can be really powerful for building commitment and ensuring that everyone is on board with the plan.
But it can also be time-consuming, right?
It can be. So it's important to choose the right decision-making method for the situation.
And regardless of which method you choose, it's crucial to clearly document the decisions that were made and the specific actions that will follow.
Absolutely. You need to define who's responsible for what, set clear deadlines, and have a plan for following up and making sure things actually get done.
Okay, so we need to move beyond just talking and create a concrete plan for action. Now, the book also acknowledges that there are certain yeah, but situations where applying these skills might feel extra challenging.
Yes, it dedicates a whole chapter to those tough cases. Like, what do you do when you're dealing with someone who's overly sensitive or someone who consistently breaks their commitments?
Or what about those people who just refuse to speak up? Or those who always have an excuse for everything?
The book offers specific guidance for navigating all sorts of challenging personalities and situations.
And the underlying message is that the fundamental principles of safety and mutual understanding still apply, even in those difficult cases.
Right. It's about adapting your approach while still staying true to those core principles.
And finally, the book offers some really practical advice on how to turn these skills into habits.
Because it's one thing to understand these concepts intellectually, but it's another thing entirely to actually use them effectively in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, especially when you're feeling stressed or emotional.
Exactly. So the book offers a bunch of strategies for making these skills a more automatic part of your communication repertoire. Like practicing one skill at a time, talking about these concepts with others, noticing those early warning signs that a conversation is becoming crucial, and even setting up rewards or accountability systems to keep yourself motivated.
It sounds like it really takes a conscious and deliberate effort to make these skills a part of your everyday life.
It does. But the payoff is huge. Because when you can consistently navigate those crucial conversations with skill and confidence, it can transform your relationships, your career, and your overall well-being.
Well, this has been a really insightful and incredibly practical deep dive into the world of crucial conversations.
Yes.
We've covered a ton of ground today, but the core message is this. Mastering crucial conversations is a skill that anyone can learn. It's not some magical talent that some people are born with. It's a set of tools and strategies that you can develop and refine over time.
And the key takeaways for you, our listener, are these. Start with heart, learn to look, make it safe, master your stories, state your path, explore others' paths, and move to action.
Those are your 7 guiding principles for navigating those high-stakes conversations.
And remember, progress, not perfection, is the goal.
So as we wrap up, we want to encourage you to take action. Think about one relationship where you want to improve your communication, and then choose one upcoming conversation where you can consciously apply some of the skills we talked about today.
Even just one small change can make a huge difference.
And as a final thought to leave you with, imagine the impact it would have on your life if you could confidently and skillfully navigate any crucial conversation that comes your way. What new possibilities might open up for you? What kind of relationships could you create? What kind of impact could you have on the world?
Those are definitely questions worth pondering.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into crucial conversations. We'll see you next time.
See you then.